It sits in nearly every kitchen on earth. It is the first fruit most children ever taste. It is the symbol of health, of teachers, of technology, of temptation itself. But what if everything you believe about this fruit is a lie? What if the apple did not come from a garden in the Middle East? What if it came from a place so remote, so wild, that humans did not find it until they were already building cities? What if the apple was not a gift from the gods, but a weapon of empire? And what if the crisp, sweet fruit you bite into today is not an apple at all, but a genetic shadow of what this fruit once was? What if I told you that the most popular apple in America for nearly 100 years tasted like wet cardboard? What if I told you that the apple industry depends on a chemical spray so toxic that workers wear full-body suits to apply it? What if I told you that the apple in your hand right now might be 11 months old? This is the story of how a single wild fruit from the mountains of Central Asia traveled across continents, built economies, rewired human taste, started revolutions, and became the most powerful fruit in history. And the truth is darker than you think. The apple did not begin in an orchard. It began in a forest so ancient that the trees remember the last ice age. Deep in the Tian Shan mountains of modern-day Kazakhstan, there grows a forest that scientists call the wild apple forest. These trees are not the short, neat trees you see in farms today. They are giants, reaching 60 feet into the sky, with trunks as thick as a man is tall. And the fruit they bear is nothing like the apple in your hand. Some are the size of a cherry. Some are the size of a grapefruit. Some are bitter. Some are sour. Some are so sweet that bears travel for miles to eat them. Some are so astringent that one bite makes your mouth pucker for an hour. And here is the first secret that changes everything. The apple did not to feed humans. It of to feed horses. The wild apple forest spread because horses and bears ate the fruit, carried the seeds in their guts, and dropped them across the mountains. Humans were late to this story. Very late. For thousands of years, the apple was just another wild fruit in a forest full of them. The people who lived near these mountains, the nomadic tribes of Central Asia, did eat the fruit. But they did not farm it. They did not name it. They did not write poems about it. They simply noticed that the fruit kept well through the winter, that it could be dried and stored, that it gave energy when the snow came. And then, something happened that would change the apple forever. Humans learned to graft. This is the single most important technology in the history of the apple. Grafting means cutting a branch from a tree that makes good fruit, and attaching it to the roots of a tree that grows strong. The result? You get the fruit you want, on a tree that survives. Without grafting, every apple seed grows a completely different tree. Plant a seed from a sweet apple, and you might get a bitter one. Plant a seed from a red apple, and you might get a green one. The apple is genetically unstable. It is a fruit that refuses to copy itself. Grafting was the cheat code. And once humans figured this out, the apple stopped being a wild fruit. It became a tool. But here is something almost nobody knows. The wild apple forest still exists today. It is called the Almaty region, which literally means father of apples. And scientists who have studied this forest have found something shocking. The genetic diversity in this one forest is greater than the genetic diversity of every apple tree in every commercial orchard on Earth combined. Every apple you have ever eaten is a tiny fraction of what this fruit could be. The Silk Road was the highway that carried this tool across the world. Traders moving west from China brought the grafted apple with them. By 1500 BC, the apple had reached Persia. By 1000 BC, it had reached Greece. By 500 BC, it had reached Rome. And here is where the story takes its first dark turn. Because the Romans did not just eat the apple. They weaponized it. When the Roman legions marched across Europe, they carried something strange in their supply trains. Apple trees. Not fruit, trees. The Romans understood something that most empires forgot. If you want to hold land, you need to feed the people on it. And if you want to feed people, you need fruit that lasts. The apple was perfect. It could be dried. It could be pressed into cider. It could be stored in cold cellars for months. Roman soldiers planted apple orchards everywhere they went. Britain, Gaul, Germania, Spain, North Africa. The apple became a marker of Roman control. Where the apple tree grew, Rome had been. But the Romans also spread something else. A story. Not a religious story. A marketing story. The Romans called the apple malum. This word meant apple. But it also meant evil. It also meant trouble. The Romans loved this double meaning. They wrote poems about the apple as a symbol of desire, of danger, of something sweet that hides a threat. This was not mythology. This was branding. The Romans were selling the apple as more than food. They were selling it as an experience. And it worked. By the time the Roman Empire fell, the apple was everywhere in Europe. But here is what nobody expected. The apple almost died. When Rome collapsed, the orchards were abandoned. The grafting knowledge was lost in many places. For 500 years, the apple became a wild fruit again, growing in forgotten Roman orchards, slowly reverting to its bitter, small, ancestral form. The medieval farmers who found these wild trees did not know what they were. They called them crab apples. They were too sour to eat. But someone, somewhere, remembered the old Roman trick. They started grafting again. And by the year 1000, the apple was back. But it was not the same apple. In the cold north of Europe, something strange happened. The apple met the honeybee. And together, they created a drink that would reshape an entire continent. But before that happened, something even more important occurred. In the Dark Ages after Rome fell, knowledge did not disappear. It went into monasteries. Monks were the only people in Europe who could read, who kept records, who preserved the old Roman texts. And among those texts were instructions for grafting apple trees. The monks began planting orchards. Not for eating. For drinking. Here is a fact that will break your understanding of history. For most of human history, water was dangerous. Rivers were full of waste. Wells were contaminated. Drinking plain water could kill you. So what did people drink? Alcohol. Not to get drunk. To survive. Beer. Wine. And in the north of Europe, where grapes would not grow, cider. The apple saved millions of lives. Not because people ate it. Because they fermented it. Cider was the drink of England, of France, of northern Spain, of Germany. It was safer than water. It was easier to make than beer. And it was cheap. A single apple tree could produce enough fruit to make hundreds of liters of cider. By the 1600s, the average English farm worker drank 3 liters of cider every single day. Children drank it. Elders drank it. It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The apple had become the fuel of an entire economy. But here is the part that gets even stranger. In England, cider was sometimes used as wages. Farm workers were paid partly in cider. Landlords measured their wealth by the number of cider barrels in their cellars. The apple was not food. It was money. It was medicine. It was survival. And then, in the 1600s, everything changed again. The apple was about to cross an ocean. And when it did, the story would take a turn that nobody in Europe could have predicted. In the early 1600s, European colonists brought apple seeds to North America. Not grafted trees. Seeds. This was a mistake. Remember what I told you about apple seeds? They do not grow true. Plant a seed from a sweet apple, and you get a random tree. Most of the apple trees grown from seed in colonial America produced bitter, inedible fruit. The colonists were furious. They had crossed an ocean for this. But then they discovered something. The bitter apples were perfect for one thing. Cider. And cider was perfect for one thing. Getting rich. In colonial America, cider was currency. It was medicine. It was the drink of presidents and farmers alike. John Adams drank a tankard of cider every morning. Thomas Jefferson grew apples at Monticello. George Washington distilled apple brandy at Mount Vernon. Benjamin Franklin wrote about the health benefits of cider. The apple was not a snack in early America. It was an industry. And then, a single man walked into the wilderness with a bag of seeds, and rewrote the future of the American apple forever. His name was John Chapman. History remembers him as Johnny Appleseed. But the real story is nothing like the cartoon. Chapman was a businessman. A land speculator. A nurseryman. And he understood something that almost nobody else did. In the early 1800s, the American government gave free land to anyone who would settle the frontier. But there was a catch. To claim the land, you had to prove you were improving it. And one way to prove improvement was to plant an orchard. Chapman would walk hundreds of miles into the wilderness ahead of the settlers. He would find a stream, clear a patch of land, and plant apple seeds. Not grafted trees. Seeds. He knew the fruit would be bitter. He did not care. Because he was not selling fruit. He was selling trees. When the settlers arrived, Chapman would sell them the young apple trees for a few cents each. The settlers would plant the trees, claim the land as improved, and then use the bitter apples to make cider. Chapman became rich. He owned over 1,200 acres of land across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. He wore ragged clothes because he chose to. He went barefoot because he chose to. He was not a simple wanderer spreading kindness. He was a frontier capitalist who understood the apple better than anyone alive. And here is the part that almost nobody knows. Chapman was planting the wrong apples. The apples from seed were small, bitter, and wild. They were called spitters, because the first reaction to tasting one was to spit it out. But those spitters were the ancestors of something extraordinary. Because in the 1800s, American farmers began to graft. They took branches from the best European apples. They attached them to the hardy roots of the American wildlings. And they created something new. The American apple. Bigger. Sweeter. More colorful. More durable. By 1900, the United States was producing more apples than any country on earth. But the apple was about to face its greatest enemy. Not disease. Not insects. Not climate. The enemy was the grocery store. In 1872, a farmer in Iowa found a strange apple growing in his orchard. It was bright red. It was large. It was sweet. He called it Hawkeye. And it was about to destroy the apple forever. The Hawkeye apple was renamed Red Delicious. And it became the most popular apple in American history. But not because it tasted good. Because it looked good. The Red Delicious was bred not for flavor. Not for nutrition. For appearance. Farmers discovered that shoppers bought apples with their eyes. A deep red skin sold better than a pale one. A perfect shape sold better than an irregular one. So breeders began to select only the prettiest apples. They made the skin thicker. They made the color deeper. They made the shape more uniform. They bred out any hint of green or yellow. They bred out any irregularity. And they destroyed the taste. By the 1980s, the Red Delicious had become a beautiful lie. It looked perfect. It tasted like wet cardboard. The flesh was mealy. The sweetness was gone. The complexity was gone. The aroma was gone. But it did not matter. The Red Delicious dominated American supermarkets for nearly a century. It was the only apple most Americans knew. And in that time, something terrible happened to the apple's genetic future. The apple industry had become a monoculture. Thousands of apple varieties that once grew across America were wiped out, replaced by a handful of varieties that looked good on shelves. The Granny Smith, the Golden Delicious, the Fuji, the Gala. These were not chosen for flavor. They were chosen for shelf life, for transport, for uniformity. The apple had become a product, not a fruit. But the Red Delicious had a secret weakness. It could not survive forever. And in the 1990s, a single apple tree in Minnesota would start a revolution that would bring flavor back from the dead. In 1960, a scientist at the University of Minnesota planted a seed. He was trying to create an apple that could survive the brutal Minnesota winter. He did not care about looks. He cared about survival. And he cared about one thing that the industry had forgotten. Crunch. The apple he created was called Honeycrisp. And when it was released to the public in 1991, nobody cared. The industry did not want it. It was too expensive to grow. The trees were fragile. The apples bruised easily. The fruit dropped from the trees too early. But then, something happened that no marketer could predict. People tasted it. And they lost their minds. The Honeycrisp was crisp. It was juicy. It was sweet with a hint of tartness. It was everything the Red Delicious was not. It was an apple that tasted like an apple should taste. The Honeycrisp became the most profitable apple in history. Farmers who grew it became millionaires. Consumers paid 3 times the price of a normal apple just to eat it. Grocery stores created special displays for it. The Honeycrisp proved that people would pay for flavor. And the apple industry learned a lesson it should have known all along. But here is where the story turns dark again. Because the Honeycrisp created a monster. Modern apple farming is one of the most chemically intensive forms of agriculture on Earth. Apple trees are sprayed with pesticides up to 20 times per year. Some orchards use chemicals so toxic that workers wear full-body protective suits to apply them. The fruit is waxed, polished, and stored in controlled atmosphere warehouses for up to a year before it reaches your hand. The apple you buy in July might have been picked the previous October. It is kept alive not by nature, but by technology. The storage rooms are kept at exactly 32 degrees Fahrenheit with oxygen levels lowered to the point where the apple literally cannot breathe. It goes into a kind of suspended animation. And when the grocery store needs it, they wake it up. Then there is the labor behind it. Migrant workers in Washington State, New York, and Michigan pick most American apples. They work long hours in orchards coated with chemicals. They are paid by the bin, not by the hour. The faster they pick, the more they earn. And the apple industry, which sells you a symbol of health and purity, depends on this invisible labor to survive. Then there is the genetic question. Scientists have now mapped the entire apple genome. They know exactly which genes control sweetness, crispness, color, and disease resistance. They are creating apples that do not brown when cut. Apples that resist the deadliest diseases. Apples that can sit in a warehouse for 2 years and still look fresh. The Arctic apple, genetically modified to never turn brown, is already in American supermarkets. And nobody is required to tell you. The apple has come full circle. From a wild fruit in a Kazakh forest, to a Roman weapon of empire, to a colonial currency, to an industrial product, to a genetically engineered commodity. And yet, every time you bite into an apple, you are tasting something that connects you to the Silk Road, to Roman legions, to frontier settlers, to the cider halls of medieval England. The apple is not just a fruit. It is a record of human ambition. And the next chapter is being written in a laboratory right now. The next time you hold an apple, look at it. Not as a snack. As a time machine. That fruit in your hand traveled 5,000 years to reach you. It survived ice ages, empires, ocean crossings, industrial revolutions, and genetic wars. It was bred for beauty and lost its soul. It was bred for flavor and became a luxury. It was bred for shelf life and became a lie. And now, it is being rebuilt in laboratories, molecule by molecule, to become something that has never existed before. The apple is the most human fruit on earth. Because like us, it is never finished. It is always being remade. Always being sold. Always being improved. And always hiding something. So bite into it. Taste the history. And remember, the apple did not conquer the world because it was the best fruit. It conquered the world because it was the most useful. The most adaptable. The most willing to change. And that is the real story of how a single wild fruit from the mountains of Central Asia became the most powerful fruit in human history.